to our brains. Okay, good evening. We are learning Maseches Yevamos, starting at a Mishnah on the bottom of Yud Gimel Amud Aleph, and we'll be going most of the way down on Yud Daled Amud Beis until about 5 lines to the bottom of the page. Baruch Hashem, we have a number of Gemaras today from other Siddurim that we are familiar with, and I am very excited to learn those Gemaras with you. But before that, we have to learn a little bit about Yevamos. Today's cases in Yevamos are not complex family trees. It's really speaking about one major sugya, which is that we learned that the tsaras erva, that the penina of our stories, has always been forbidden to be married when there is a case of yibum. If the woman is an erva, if the Yevama is an erva, then the tsara is also problematic. So we're going to get to that shortly, but let's start the Mishnah here. The Mishnah says at the bottom of Yud Gimel Amud Aleph, Sheish arayos chamuros me'elu, there are six women who are ushered to someone, which are more stringent than the 15 that are found in our Mishnah. Because they can only marry other people, they cannot marry the Yavam or any of the brothers. They can only marry other people, and then in those cases, tsaros sehen mutaros. So who are those people? It's Imo, his mother, the Eshes Aviv. It is going to be the wife of his father, the Achos Aviv, the sister of his father, Achoso me Aviv, his sister from the father's side, the Eshes Achi Aviv, the wife of the brother of the father, that's an aunt through marriage, ve'eshes achiv me'aviv, and the wife of a brother through marriage as well. Then the Mishnah stops talking about this and goes back to the conversation that we started with on Daf Beis. And that is that our Mishnah on Daf Beis says that if a woman is an erva, if the Yevama is an erva, then the tsara is also prohibited. What we didn't learn is that there's a fundamental machlokes about this, and that machlokes is being presented right here. Beis Shammai matirin hatzaros la'achim. Beis Shammai allowed that even when the Yevama was an erva, that the tzara, because she was really not related, that she was allowed to marry the brothers. Beis Hillel Osrim, just for the clarity, Rashi at the bottom of the page says, Beis Shammai matirin tsaras erva, the wife, the second wife, Penina, even though the primary wife was an erva, lihisyabem le'achiv, to marry the brothers of the man who died, to les lehu hach drasha litzror. Because Beis Shammai doesn't use the drasha of litzror, and when we begin the Gemara on the top of the next page, we'll see why that's true. But of course, Beis Hillel Osrim, they hold like our Mishnah on Daf Beis that indicates clearly that if a woman is a rayos to the yavam, then even her tzara, even the second wife, would be prohibited as well. Chaltzu, if there was a chalitza that was done, so let's say chalitza was decided to be done in a particular case, what does that do to the woman? That's a machlokas as well. Beis Shammai poslin min hakehuna. Beis Shammai says this is an equivalent to a divorce. So if you do chalitza, right? So if you probably have been to the bezdin or seen the chalitza shoe that the bezdin has, if that whole procedure is done, Beis Shammai says that she is psulan min hakehuna. Beis Hillel machshir, and Beis Hillel says that it's not a problem at all. Because if you look at Rashi on the second line, Rashi says, "Lefisha chalitzasan shelo letzorech v'harei kechalutzas min hanochri min hanochri." It's nothing. It's a zero. It's nothing to even talk about because there was no chalitza in the first place because the tzara is not allowed to be married in the first place. You're doing chalitza. What does that? He doesn't agree to Beis Shammai. So there's a chasm between the two of them. So of course he's not going to agree. What about nisyabmu? So there are two. We're going to see a different. If there's yibum, Beis Shammai machshirin. Beis Shammai says that if there's yibum with the tzara, that it's machshirin, no problem. With Beis Hillel poslin, Beis Hillel says that it's pasul. What does pasul mean? Says Rashi on the fourth line, shenivulu le'aser. There was tashmish with someone who you're aser to. Anyone who has tashmish amita to a person to whom they are puzzled to, then asa azona, the zona asura lekahuna. Wow. So this is a huge chakira in Shitas. We're talking about diametrically opposed opinions, whereas Beis Shammai holds that the tsaras erva is muteres, and if you do chalitza, then it's a real chalitza and it's divorce. And Beis Hillel holds, what are you talking about? She's usher in the first place. Chalitza is the zero effect. And then if there's yibum with that tzara, Beis Shammai says, good to go, no problem. Beis Hillel says, you just made that woman into a zona, and she can no longer marry a kohen.
But it's not yibum.
Beis Shammai says no. Beis Hillel, it's a zero. It's like it's just an inappropriate halachic relationship. It's an illicit halachic relationship. It's a rayos, straight up a rayos. That's why she's a zona. So that's why there's such a big difference. And then here's the really, I don't know hashkafically what this means, but the Gemara says the Mishnah says on the third line, Yud Gimel Amud Beis, third line, and afal pi she'elu osrin ve'elu matirin. Even though in regards to chalitza, we saw that Beis Hillel said that that she was not ruined to a Kohen, and Beis Shammai said that she was. So even though that's true, and as well in the case of Yibum, Elu Poslam ve'Elu Machshirin, the Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai argue, Lo Nimnu Beis Shammai milisa nashim mi Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai still married the women, some of the women in Beis Hillel. The Lo Beis Hillel mi Beis Shammai, and Beis Hillel also didn't hold back from marrying the women of Beis Shammai. No, in both cases, that should present a problem, because if you just look at the top line of this page, in a case of Chalitza, Beis Shammai should be concerned about marrying someone from Beis Hillel, because Beis Shammai holds that those people are usher to a Kohen. So you gotta like wear wear a bracelet. I'm usher to a Kohen. Why aren't they concerned about it? And on the flip side, and more severely, what about Beis Hillel marrying into Beis Shammai? If Beis Hillel marries into a woman who was a tzara to a Yevama, that's a big problem. If he marries that woman, that's tzara, so that's kares. That's a huge problem. So we're going to be working on that for part of today. And then the last part of the Mishnah is of the same tone. Kol hataharos v'hatmeos shahayu elu mitaharin ve'elu mitamin. In cases where Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel had their arguments in regards to tuma v'tahara, and some said tahor, some said tameh. Still, lo nimnu osin taharos elu al gabe elu. They still would work together, eat each other's food. How does all of this work? So we'll have to get there in the Gemara. But before we get there, we have to go back to the unique shita of Beis Shammai. Beis Shammai was of the opinion that, let's say Ruvain and Shimon are brothers, and Ruvain marries Shimon's daughter, and Ruvain's also Ruvain marries Shimon's daughter, and Ruvain's married to another woman as well, and then Shimon dies, and then there's the possibility of doing Yibum. So in a case of Yibum, if the person is an erva, in this case the daughter of the father ended up being the brother, so he'd have to do Yibum on the daughter because she's an arayos. So we held in our Mishnah up until now for the first 13 blot of the Masechta pretty clearly that the tzara is also forbidden, and Beis Shammai says no problem. I mean, after 13 pages of this Masechta, you need to really prove yourself. So the Gemara provides two answers, each one significant, and that will take us to the end of the short lines here. Here's answer number one. Amar Rebbe Shimon ben Pazi, my time of the Beis Shammai. What is the reason why a tzaras erva, according to Beis Shammai, is mutter to marry the brother? Says the Gemara, dichsiv, because the pasuk says, Losihya eshes hames hachutza leish zar. The woman who is the chutza, she should not marry the eshes hames. She's the wife of the mace, hachutza, the outer one, leish zar. She should not marry a strange man. In other words, chutza michlal deika pnimis. There's an outer wife and an inner wife, meaning there's the tzara and there's the regular wife. So the tzara is the chutza, and she should not marry an ish zar. Instead, she should marry the brother. She should stay local. She should marry into the family. So that's what the Gemara says. That she should not marry. So therefore, we see she should not marry out of the family. She should marry the yavam. Okay, if that's the drasha of Beis Shammai, I understand. But then Beis Hillel, why does Hillel say that it's forbidden? Because Beis Hillel say miboile. They need the word hachutza lichad Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav. What does Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav say? The Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav, 12 lines down, he says, Minayin shein kiddushin tovsin b'yavama. How do we know that if there is a yavama who you're not supposed to marry, and she's makadesh someone, that doesn't work? So let's say there's a scenario where I'm able, in theory, that yibum applies. Okay, so then I should be able to marry person X. If she tries to marry somebody else while there's a zikas yibum between me and her, that kedushin is not tovsin. The mechanics of the marriage do not work. That's what we learned a couple of days ago. What happens if there's nisr kares? Is kedushin tovsin? Is kedushin not tovsin? So that's what Rabbi Yehuda Rav says. Is it minayin she'ein kedushin tovsin b'yavama? Rashi says just to our left, dibur hamaschel she'ein kedushin tovsin b'yavama. Yavama shelo chalza. You have a woman who's subject to yibum and she did not have chalitza. Minayin that im niskadcha l'shuk. She marries someone out in the marketplace, a random soul. De'ein kedushin tovsin. So says the Gemara, going back inside. This is why the reason why Beis Hillel doesn't agree to Beis Shammai is because Beis Hillel uses the pasuk that Beis Shammai used for something else. He says that this Yevama cannot marry anybody other than the Zika Sibum or Chalitza. But if she hasn't had the Chalitza, then the Zika Sibum is still in place. And therefore, Ein Kiddushin Tovsin. And that's why Beis Hillel does not use the same pasuk as Beis Shammai. So that's what it means. Lo sihye b'havaya l'zar. She's not allowed to have a marriage to a zar. Ubeis Shammai. Oh, okay. Well, how does Beis Shammai respond to that? This is going to be the tone for the next many lines. Ubeis Shammai. What does he do? What does he do with this? Miksiv lachutz. It doesn't say lachutz. It says chutza ksiv, different word. So there's an extra letter hey, and therefore Beis Shammai holds that I can learn both. I can learn the hey. I can learn what I need to learn. I got everything I need, and everything is fine. And I don't agree with Beis Hillel. Beis Hillel, well, if Beis Shammai is going to make a distinction between lachutz and chutza, maybe you should as well. So Beis Hillel says, like we learned in day school, and like Rashi says all over the place, kevan dichsiv chutza, kiman dichsiv lachutz dami. We learned in second grade that whenever you see le Mitzrayim and Mitzrayim, that those mean the same exact things. That's only true according to Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai doesn't agree to that. How does he read pasuk and chumash? I don't know. It really doesn't mean what I'm saying. It really means that for drasha purposes, the Beis Shammai looks at the lamed of lachutz and chutza as differently. So the Gemara continues to develop Beis Hillel's idea that chutza and lachutz are similar. Titania, third of the way down. Any word that really should have the letter lamed in the beginning, it can still be placed elsewhere in the version of a hey. Hitil lahakasuv hey bisofa. And let's just further the idea still more. The Tana Debei Rabbi Shmuel, Kigon Alim and Alima, Machanaim and Machnaima, Mitzrayim and Mitzrayima, Divlasaima, Yerushalayim, Midbara. All of these words are words where there is no lamed, but the hey represents the lamed. And if Beis Hillel is of the opinion that lachutz and chutza are the same, then he cannot make the exceptional drasha that Beis Shammai made. He can't agree with him because the lachutz and chutza are exactly the same thing. Oh, Beis Shammai, hold on one second. We have to push back on Beis Shammai for a second. Beis Shammai, remember that Beis Hillel used the word hachutza to teach us that kedushin are not tofsin when there's a zikas yibum. Well, where does Beis Shammai learn that from? Beis Shammai halfway down to Rav Yehuda Marav Minalahu. How does he know that when there's a zikas yibum, that when there is a halachic tether between the yavam and the yavama, that she cannot marry anybody else, and even if she tries, the kedushin are not tofsin? So he says, Mili ish zar nafka. He learns it from the ish zar. That actually makes a lot of sense. You cannot marry a strange man. You can only marry the man to whom you have a zikas yibum. Beis Hillel nami tepuk luhul mili ish zar. Oh, come on. It's such a good answer, Beis Shammai. As Beis Shammai will say to Beis Hillel, you have a great pasuk. How do we know the kedushin are not tofes when there's zikas yibum, when there's a halachic tether between the yavam and the yavama? Because the pasuk says leish zar, she shouldn't marry a strange woman. So the Gemara says inochanami. Yeah, you're correct. You're absolutely right. Beis Hillel really could learn that from there. But if that's true, and if you follow the Shat of Ataria, then what word is left over? The word is chutza, because that was the whole reason why Beis Hillel didn't agree to Beis Shammai, because he used the word chutza to learn out of Rabbi Yehuda Marav. But now that we have Leish Zar to teach them the din of Rabbi Yehuda Marav, the kedushin are not tosim when there's a zikas yibum, so then chutza lamali. Then Beis Hillel is back to the drawing board. Says the Gemara, no, it's all the same. L'ravos ha'arusa, to teach us that a woman who was only engaged is in the same exact category of in regards to the tzara. Fine. Be'idach, what does Beis Shammai have to say about that? Mi chutza, ha chutza. The word chutza and ha chutza are different, and the pasuk in Chumash has a ha and has a hey in the beginning of the word as well, ha chutza, and therefore I'm able to learn out more than one thing from that pasuk. Be'idach, what does Beis Hillel say? Chutza and ha chutza lo mashma lahu. That there really is no difference between chutza and ha chutza. Now, within answer number one, we're able to understand the machlokas Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel. Of course, there are 10 mini drushes to make here, but the primary one is, why is it that Beis Shammai holds against our Mishnah and against Beis Hillel? Why is it that Beis Shammai is of the opinion that the tzaras erva is allowed to be married by the brother, by the yavam? And the answer is because the pasuk says, as we started this Gemara, about 10 lines down, lo sia isha hames hachutza leish zar. That's what Beis Shammai holds. Now, Rava has a more sophisticated response, not minimizing Abai, but Abai's was more simple than Rava's. What does Rava say? Rava Amar ta'amaihu de Beis Shammai de'ein iser chal al iser, because you are not allowed to layer isurim one on top of the other. What were our isurim? Well, we started with the erva of the yavama to the yavam. In this case, let's say that Ruvain was married to Shimon's daughter and Ruvain died. Shimon became the yavam to his daughter, which is impossible. That's one layer of isur. And now we're adding in a second layer of isur of tzaras erva. No way. Ein isur chal al isur. Says the Gemara, very subtle, says the Gemara 2/3 of the way down, 8 lines before the wide lines. Tenach, I understand Rava's answer of what Beis Shammai is thinking of Ein isur chal al isur. Listen carefully. Tenach, I could understand Heicha de nasa meis ve'achar kach nasa chai, that we're talking about brothers who marry siblings. Heicha de nasa meis, where the brother who will die, that was Ruvain in our story. If he married one of the sisters first, ve'achar kach nasa chai, and then Shimon, who will outlive him, married the other sister, lo asi iser achos isha v'chayil a iser eshes ach. So there was already a status of eshes ach, because when Ruvain married Chana, So then, even before Shimon married Penina, there was already an Isser of Eishesach. We're not going to double over the Isurim, that I understand. But says the Gemara, Ella, if it was reversed, Ella Nasa Eishesach, we're 2/3 of the way down, 5 lines before the Gemara gets wide again. Ella Nasa Chai ve'achar kach Nasa Meis. If the brother who would live longer, Shimon, he gets married to the sister first, ve'achar kach Nasa Meis, and only afterwards does his brother who ends up dying in the story, and he marries the sister, then Achos Isha Kadim. Then the Yisurim are flipped. So says the Gemara, don't worry. Kevan delo asi Isser Eishes Ach. Chayla Isser Achos Isha, because the Isser of Eishes Ach doesn't apply in such a case, and he first has the Isser of Achos Isha. So then Havila Tsaras Erva Shaloba Makom Mitzvah B'Sharia. It doesn't apply anyways because it's a Tsaras Erva Shaloba Makom Mitzvah, and in that case there is no Yibum, and therefore because there's no mitzvah of yibum, therefore Bisharia. That's how we could understand. So these are the two answers. Answer number one is that the reason why Beis Shammai holds that a tsaras erva is mutter to the yavam is because of a pasuk. Rava holds because of ein isur chalal isur. Good. Our Mishnah at the very top of this page on the first word spoke about a machlokes Beis Shammai Beis Hillel, that if chalitza was done, then either according to Beis Shammai we treat this person like a divorced woman, and therefore she's psula to a kohen, and Beis Hillel says that they're kosher, that she's totally fine. So the Gemara says chaltzu Beis Shammai poslim pshita. This is obvious. What is obvious? Why is this obvious? So says Rashi as follows. Rashi is about 8 lines up from where we are, 2/3 of the way down in the Rashi. Dibur Maschel Pshita. Kevan de la Beis Shammai zekukos liyavam. Kevan de la Beis Shammai zekukos liyavam. Since according to Beis Shammai there is yibum with a tzara, so then pshita imchal psulos. It's obvious if you're in Beis Shammai's camp and you're like, yeah, chalitza that's going to be ushered to the kohen. Of course that's true. Ula Beis Hillel as well. Kevan de patre lehumi zikas yibum, because there is no halachic tethering between the two of them. Imchaltzu ksheres lekahuna. Delav chalitza hi. It's a 0. It's l'shitasam all the way, and the Gemara says it's so obvious. So says the Gemara, why are we changing gears here? Why is the Gemara adding this seemingly extraneous line? Why does the Mishnah have this line about chalitza? Should be obvious. La fuke to Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, who said the following: Damar bo unesaken lahem letzaros sheyuhu choltzos v'lo misyabmos. Maybe we would say that the tzaros in such cases should do chalitza and not yibum. Kamash malan the Beis Hillel machshir. It's to reject the shita of Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, to say specifically that we hold like the shita of Beis Hillel and Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri's suggestion that we should do chalitza for the case of tzaras erva is rejected outright. The Mishnah continued, Nisyabmu Beis Hillel psulim, hasulam ali. This is also very obvious. Right? It's the same exact reason why it's obvious that Rashi said in regards to chalitza. According to Beis Shammai, there is a zikas yibum, so therefore the yibum of fine. It's all the same thing. So why do you keep repeating everything? Hasulam ali. Why do I need this again? Says the Gemara, you're absolutely right intellectually. I did the Tana Chaltzu, Tani Nami Nisyabu. We really didn't need the second case because it's kind of like an extension of the first case. Once you understand that the difference between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel in regards to the tzaras erva is zikas yibum, all the chips will fall properly. The chalitza is only a chalitza according to Beis Shammai because there's zikas yibum. When there's no zikas yibum according to Beis Hillel, it's not a chalitza. You spit on the ground. That's all that happened. Clean up. It's done. There's nothing. It's a 0. And the same is true by yibum because there's a zikas yibum according to Beis Shammai. So then there's an implication in one way. And because there's no zikas yibum, that therefore Beis Hillel is going to say that there's a problem because there was tashma shemit and she's a zona now. Fine. That's what the Gemara says. 3 lines into the wide lines, let us have a throwback to Seder Moed. It's not awesome. Megillah, Nikreis, Be'achadasar, V'shnei. I've never been so happy to read this Mishnah as this morning. I was a little middle of listening to this. I'm like, oh. Famous Mishnah in Maseches Megillah that tells us the many days upon which we can read the Megillah, each one depicting a certain halachic scenario. Mukaf choma, not mukaf choma, the days of Bezdin. Okay, we remember a lot of that. Says the Gemara, Amalei Reish Lakish the Rav Yochanan, Ikri kan lo siskodedu. Why don't we say that this is a case of lo siskodedu? And of course, we know the famous drasha of lo sa'asu agudos. We know that there's a prohibition in halacha that we should not have different sects within the Torah community. It's not right. So, for example, the Gra and the Mishnah Berurah have a machlokes about nefilas apayim on your tefillin arm. So some of the poskim say, the Mishnah Berurah quotes this, that you should do what everybody does, because otherwise it's lo sasu agudos agudos. The Mishnah Berurah holds that when you're wearing tefillin, you put your head down on your right arm, and the Gra holds that you put it even on your left arm. So there the poskim say that might be agudos agudos. So what about over here, says the Gemara? What about the Mishnah Megillah? So the Gemara says, no, that's not lo sisko to do, because that pasuk of lo sisko to do, hi lo sisko to do mi baile legufe. We need that pasuk for itself. The pasuk of lo sisko to do in its context is telling us not to harm ourselves when there is a mace and there is a tragedy that takes place, and sometimes as a coping tool, an unhealthy one at that, is a person may harm themselves, bruise themselves, whatever it may be. So that's what the pasuk means, is that there's an isser deoraisa to do that. So says the Gemara, well, that's not pshat in the pasuk, because in Cain, if that's what the pasuk would have meant to say specifically that it's only like the pshat of the pasuk, in Cain, lema kra lo sigodedu. My sis go to do shmamina lahachi hudasa, that it's coming to tell me the drasha and not the pshat in the pasuk. What's the drasha of lo sasu agudos agudos? So says the Gemara ve'ema kule lahachi hudasa. Maybe we should say the whole pasuk is talking about this. Says the Gemara, no, im kain lemakra lo sigodu my lo sis go to do shmamina tarte, that we have the ability to learn out two things. The basic pshat in the pasuk is you cannot harm yourself, and the drasha part of the pasuk, which is lo sasu agudos agudos. So this was the question that Reish Lakish asked Rav Yochanan: is why is it that the Mishnah in Maseches Megillah, where we're told that we can read the Megillah on the 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, and 15th of Adar, why isn't that lo sasu agudos agudos? We should do everything on the same day. Says the Gemara, Amar Le, Rav Yochanan responds to Reish Lakish, Ad kan lo shanis, have you not yet learned your Mishnayos? If you're talking about Maseches Megillah and you're going through Shas, it means you already learned Psachim. What did we learn in Psachim? Makom shenohagu la'asos malacha ba'arvei Psachim al chatzos osen. This we learned as well, that where there is a minhag to do malacha, where one is allowed to do malacha on Erev Pesach up to chatzos, the halacha is that it's mutter. But makom shenohagu shelo la'asos ein osen. So there we see that there's a distinction. Nobody calls that lo sasu agudos agudos. Why did you ask your question over there, Reish Lakish? Why are you only asking by Maseches Megillah? There are plenty of other halachic areas you could have asked from, and one of them in Mishnayos is before what you just asked. So Amar Le, Reish Lakish says back to Rav Yochanan, Aminolach ana isura. I asked you from Megillah where it's usher to read the Megillah on certain days. And how do we know that that's true? You can only be Yotzei on your day. That's why sometimes if you travel from outside of Yerushalayim to inside Yerushalayim, all these complicated cases and in Hilchos Megillah, where you may have to hear the Megillah many times in a row. That's very possible. Got it, I understand. So but Rav Yochanan, when you asked, I told you about Megillah. When can you read it? You're like, it depends on Minig HaMakom. Well, it's not Minig HaMakom. It's a totally different halacha. By Megillah, it's us to read the Megillah on certain days. You're not allowed to. You're not Yotzei. And over here, you're quoting from Minhagim. So says the Gemara, V'hasam lavi surah havya. Really, it's not a question of halachic isra. That's not true. B'hatnan balayla. The Mishnah says that when it comes to nighttime, Beis Shammai Oshen Beis Hillel Matirin, we're discussing whether or not there's a din of isra malacha on the night before. Fine. So Amarle, no. Hasam haroa omer malacha udelesle. Sorry, that was the end of the question. Amarle, he said back to him, no. Hasam haroa, a person sees someone doing or not doing malacha omer malacha udelesle. When it comes to that area of malacha on Erev Chatzos, on Erev Pesach, guys, maybe you're not doing malacha because maybe you don't have any. It's very easy to look at the distinction. What? So says the Gemara on the bottom line, wait 1 second, and now we know why we're learning about lo sisko to do, because it really had nothing to do with our sugi up until now. Say goodbye to Seder Moed. How can you tell me that you have two different camps of people in the same Klal Yisrael, and some of them say she's a Yevama, and some of them say she's a Zona? It's quite the halachic difference between the two people. Says the Gemara, okay, it's how Beis Shammai paskins, but is it a psak that they teach in public? Says the Gemara, top of Yadalam, now misavris asu Beis Shammai kidivrehim. Did they actually execute their psak? Did they allow the tzaras erba to get married to the brother, to the yavam? No, lo asu Beis Shammai kidivrehim. So that's how the Gemara tries to get out of it, and the Gemara is like, I'm not so sure that everybody agrees with you. For Rav Yochanan Amar asu ve'asu, they absolutely did. They allowed the tzaras erva to marry the yavam. Absolutely, they did, and they're not the only ones who had the machloket. So beplukta the Rav Shmuel, the Rav Amar lo asu Beis Shammai kedivrehim. Rav said they never did it. Shmuel Amar, you're not correct. Amar asu v'asu, they absolutely did. So which one is it? That's what the Gemara is bothered by. This. Now we have our question about agudos agudos again. Like it seems clear, certainly to Shmuel and certainly to Rav Yochanan, that Beis Shammai absolutely, in theory, held of Tzaras Erva, and they paskin this way publicly, that a Tzaras Erva can marry. And what that meant for Beis Hillel, because the Mishnah said they married each other, what that meant for Beis Hillel is that woman's a zona. That's a big problem. So we're gonna have to deal with that. So says the Gemara, wait a second. Amos, what are we talking about in history in regards to Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel? We know they had a lot of machlokos, and then there was a baskol that came out that said we always paskin like Beis Hillel. So when was this machloka? I could understand under certain circumstances that maybe we should follow Beis Shammai. Let's see what happens. Amos, when was this? Fifth line of Yudal Amud. If you want to say that there wasn't a baskol yet, so then my time on demanda amar lo asu. Why would someone say that Beis Shammai didn't follow their own psak? There was no baskol to say that the halacha wasn't like them yet. So Beis Shammai was a viable sheet at that point. We say, we've learned it in this Masechta, the Beis Shammai in the place of Beis Hillel is Eino Mishnah. But before the baskol came out that we'd follow Beis Hillel, so then they had a viable shita. Why would you say lo asu? That's what the Gemara says. My time of demand damar lo asu. And if you want to say elo la'achar baskol, my time of demand damar asu, if the baskol already happened, then how could Beis Shammai go against the baskol? That's the Gemara's question. So it says the Gemara two answers. I could explain in both cases either that maybe we're talking about before the baskol, and maybe we're talking about after. Let's say that we're talking about a case where it's before the baskol. So in theory, the shita Beis Shammai should be a viable shita, but we're talking about a time where Beis Hillel is the rov. Lemande amar lo asu. According to the shita that Beis Shammai did not allow the tzaras erva to marry the yavam, that's because the Beis Hillel ruba. Because we paskin like the majority. Yachid Rab Malacha Karabim. Umanda Amar Asu, in that period of time prior to the baskol, according to the shita who said that Beis Shammai did execute their shita, Kiyas linan basar ruba. When do we say that the majority outweighs the minority in halacha? That's heicha dechiyadadeninu. That's when you're on a level playing field. But hacha Beis Shammai mechadaditfei. Ooh. Wow, they were sharper. We know that about Beis Shammai, that they had they were Oker Harim, whatever the language is, they were a brilliant Beis Medrash of people. So prior to the baskol that we paskin like Beis Hillel, I could understand both pathways. Either that the majority was Beis Hillel and therefore majority wins, or no, majority Beis Hillel, but they weren't as sharp as Beis Shammai, so Yachid V'Rabim only applies under certain circumstances. Okay, fine. And Ve'ibais Ema, 10, 12 lines down, maybe we would say la'achar baskol. Maybe we would say that the time that we're talking about when there's a machlokes of whether or not maybe Beis Shammai actually let a tzaras erva marry the yavam, maybe that was after the baskol. Now let's go through this. Manda amar lo asu, according to the one who says that Beis Shammai did not execute this shita of tzaras erva marrying the yavam, the hanafka baskol, because maybe they agreed. Okay, we lost. What can you do? Uman damar asu, and according to the ones who say asu, that in fact they did allow the tzaras erva to marry the yavam, that's because Rabbi Yoshua he damarei mashgichin bebaskol. Torah lamina shamaymi. Too bad. That's great. You heard something come out of that, and that's beautiful. You were zocha to see a nace, but we don't paskin like that because the Torah is down here. The Torah is not up there, and therefore it doesn't matter. And Beis Shammai can stick to their guns. Uman damar asu karinan be, according to the one who said that they actually did this. So then, sorry, I didn't read that right. Uman damar asu, according to the one who says that the Beis Shammai did actually do this, then we might have a halachic issue. Karinan kan losis godadu, los asu agudos. If taka it's true that Beis Shammai really allowed this to happen, that they allowed a tzaras erva to marry a yavam in the face of Beis Hillel, that means we have agudos. Shiloh. That's why this was the whole flow. Megillah, Psachim, all to frame out this question of what about us? What about Yibum? And what about the Tzaras Erva? It's a huge difference in Psak. It's the difference between a mitzvah d'oraisa and an Isser d'oraisa. So says the Gemara, two answers. Amar Abaye, Ki amrinan losis godadu. When we say that there's an Isser of losis godadu, that's Kigon, Shtei bate dinim be'ir achas. That's what we have. That's what we have. Let's see what this says. Shtei bate dinim be'ir achas halalu morim kedibre Beis Shammai v'halalu morim kedibre Beis Hillel. Yikes! That would be according to Abaye. We don't paskin like him. Just I don't want anyone to walk away misunderstanding. If you have a psak, I'm just going to use the CRC gives psak X and the aguda gives psak Y and the bate din. That's lo sasu agudos. That's what Abaye is saying. that it's two batei din in one city. Aval, 1/3 of the way down. Shtei batei din b'shtei ayaros leslanba. If they're in different cities, then that's not lo sasu agudos. So maybe Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel were not in the same city. Omar le Rava, Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel kishtei batei din b'ir achas dami. They're right near each other. They could hear each other yelling out the windows. Of course, they were in the same place. Elo Amar Rava, no, Abai, you got it wrong. Ki amrinan lo siskodedu. When do we say that there's an issue of lo siskodedu? Kigon beis din batei din b'ir achas. Peleg half the city is more in Kedivri Beis Shammai. One beis din goes like Beis Shammai. Who Peleg more in Kedivri Beis Hillel. That's when you have a problem. Aval shtei batei din b'ir achas leslan ba. And that's how we paskin. That's why we're allowed to have two Orthodox batei din in Chicago. Why? Because it's okay if they have different psukim. That's not lo siskodedu. Lo siskodedu is when one bezdin is fractured and it pushes out two psukim. That's a problem. But what we have is lechatchila. No problem at all. No problem. So let's analyze lo siskodedu a little more. Tashma. We know, we've learned this before. B'mekomo shel Rabbi Eliezer, hayu korsim eitzim lasos pechamim b'Shabbos lasos barzel. On Shabbos, according to Rabbi Eliezer, this was in Rabbi Eliezer de Mila, the parak that speaks about bris Mila. Let's say it's Shabbos morning and you don't have the knife to do the bris. What do? So no problem. Go get some wood, cut them off the tree, light a fire, smelt some metal, shape it, do it. I don't know how to make metal. And then when you're done, okay, you have a knife. Great, you can do anything you want. And the Gemara says, this part is unrelated, but we're going to read it anyways. Last short line. That's a famous sheet of Rabbi Yossi Aglili, is that there is no din of basar b'chalav by chicken because chickens don't have milk. When do we say basar b'chalav? It's upsetting.
Hope he's so nice.
Sorry.
Fried chicken, buttermilk.
By the way, every time I look up a fried chicken recipe, it's always a buttermilk one. And then you use like coffee rich. It's not right. Rabbi Yossi Aglili held this way, and there are other stories in Shas about this, that he actually behaved this way, that he held this way. This is not our sugya for today. Anyways, what is our sugya for today is the story about Rabbi Eliezer, who allowed all the hechsher mitzvah, the preparatory work to make a knife, even on Shabbos for the sake of a bris on Shabbos. First long line, b'mekomo shel Rabbi Eliezer in. Yes, Rabbi Eliezer did allow all of the preparatory work that would go into making this knife on Shabbos, but b'mekomo shel Rabbi Akiva lo. Why would Rabbi Akiva not allow that? Because the Tanya, klal amar Rabbi Akiva, kol malacha she'efshar lasos me'er Shabbos ein adoches Shabbos. When are you allowed to do a hechsher mitzvah? Only if you have when are you allowed to do malacha on Shabbos? Only when there's no choice in the matter. But you forgot to make the knife. I'm sorry, you're not allowed. Good. So this is our question, which is, why isn't this agudos? You have Rabbi Eliezer people who are smelting metal on Shabbos, and you have Rabbi Akiva people who are saying that they're standing outside singing that song. You guys are being mechal Shabbos. Lo sasu agudos. The Gemara responds, what kind of ridiculous answer is this? Mekomos shiny, just like we saw in Psachim. That's obvious answer. So the Gemara says it's such an obvious answer. Udekarila, my karila. When you were asking your question, come on. I mean, any kid in day school, they live in the different cities. It's obvious. Because Shabbos is so chamor, maybe we'd say that everyone has to behave kemakom echadami. Kamash malan, that's not true. That we are allowed to still have healthy separations within Klal Yisrael, even with divergent psukim for Hilchos Shabbos, and even though Shabbos is chamor, kamash malan, that even though this case should have been obvious, we wouldn't have needed to mention it, but we mentioned it so that we don't misunderstand that Shabbos is not put on a special level as it relates to agudos. Tashma, let's try again. Rabbi Abo ki ikla la'asred Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi have a metaltal shraga. When he was in the town of Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi and a candle was already lit, so he's allowed to move it around. He held that it wasn't muksa. However, Rabbi Yochanan lo have a metaltal shraga. But when he was in the city of Rabbi Yochanan, he would not. Rabbi Yochanan held it was going to be muksa. So says the Gemara, lo sasu agudos. We see that some people carry candles and some people don't. Some people say that it's muksa, some people don't. Agudos. Says the Gemara, v'hai kushya. V'lo amrinan mekomo shiny. Come on. It's so obvious. Says the Gemara, anan hachi kamrin. No, this wasn't the shayla of agudos to start with. You misunderstood the question, says the Gemara. What was the question? Rabbi Abu, heichi avad hacha hachi, v'heichi avad hacha hachi. How? You're one person. How can you hold both, that you're allowed to hold a candle on Shabbos and that you're not allowed to hold a candle? It's not a thing of agudos. You don't know what the halacha is, Rabbi Abo. So says the Gemara, no, of course he knew. He's the great Amora, 2/3 of the way down, more, 3/4 of the way down, 8 lines into the wide lines. Rabbi Abo Krav Yeshua ben Levi Svirli. Really, Rabbi Abo was of the opinion that it's mutter to move a shraga, to move a candle on Shabbos. The Rabbi Yochanan, when he got to the city where Rabbi Yochanan lived, the Rabbi Yochanan. That's fine. It's like minagamakom. When you go to what they're doing, you got to do like the Romans do. That's fine. So where Rabbi Yochanan lived, we were very conscientious. We were a makbid on this. We would not carry a candle. But where Rabbi Shimon Levi lived, no problem. The Gemara is fine with that. We're afraid that maybe his servant will misunderstand. The shama is a shamash. He may misunderstand. He may think that Rabbi Abo has kind of lost the step. No, what's the big deal? Demoda leila shama. He'll tell him just by Rabbi Yochanan. It's mutter, but not by Rabbi Yochanan. It's easy. Fine. Tashma, let's try again. So that's what we saw in our Mishnah, that even though, it says a Bryce actually, but similar to our Mishnah, that they married each other's children. Beis Shammai would make shidduchim with Beis Hillel and vice versa. If you want to say that Beis Shammai's psak, that a tzaras erva can marry Yavam was theoretical psak, it might be true in the annals of the Beis Medrash, but it's not true in reality. So then, Mishum Hachi Lo Nimnu, then I can understand why Beis Hillel would marry Beis Shammai's children and vice versa. Ela Iamris Asu, but if you're going to say that Beis Shammai really paskin that a tzaras erva is allowed to marry a Yavam, Amai Lo Nimnu, why didn't they hold back? They should have. Bishlama Beis Shammai, I could even fathom Beis Shammai, I mean Beis Hillel Lo Nimnu, the Bnei Chai Ve'Lavin, the worst case scenario is that, okay, she's a grusha, but Ela Beis Hillel mi Beis Shammai, Amai Lo Nimnu, Bnei Chai Ve'Krisus Mamzerim Ninhu. It's too much. It's too much of a risk. You want to gamble? Fine. Beis Shammai can marry Beis Hillel. Fine, because the worst case scenario, she's a grusha. But to mess around with Karesh, she's a Yevama turned Zona, it's not worth it. And if you want to say that Kasabri Beis Hillel to Ein Mamzer Mechai Krisus, that Mamzer cannot be the result of Chai Krisus, that's not true. Because Amar Rav Elazar, even though there is a machlokas about the tzaras erva if she can marry in, Modim she'ein Mamzer elami misha isuro isur erva v'anush, which is this woman. So even Beis Hillel agrees that there's Mamzerus. Elalav shmamino, the wasser must be therefore, it must be that Beis Shammai didn't actually act upon this psak. Says the Gemara, not true. Lo. You're wrong. Really, Beis Shammai did execute this psak, but it's like on the resume. How old are you? When's your birthday? What color hair do you have? And are you a mamzeres? No, it's not a mamzeres. Are you a tzaras erba? Is really the right way to ask it. It's Beis Hillel. That's what they were talking about at Shabbos. Beis Hillel is like, Saras Erba, she's a mamzeres. That's what was happening socially. Is that was the conversations. Oh, wow, you have such a beautiful family, dowry, everything is discussed. I just want to let you know. Oh yeah, Baruch Hashem. And by the way, I forgot to tell you, my daughter's at Saras Erba. So that the modil who parshe that they shared with each other. The Gemara actually says that this is very logical because of the last case in our Mishnah that we learned on the previous Amud. What does it say over there? Because even by Tumah V'Tara, obviously they didn't agree on everything, but they told each other. And says the Gemara on the top of the next page, if you want to tell me that they communicated with each other, they informed each other. By the way, I'm a Beis Shammai Nick, I hold halachas X, Y, and Z in regards to Tumah V'Tara. You're a Beis Hillel guy, fine, you hold of A, B, and C, great. Mishum hachi lo nimnu, that's why they could make Tumah V'Tara together. That's great. If you're going to say that they didn't communicate with each other, then Bishlama Beis Shammai Beis Hillel lo nimnu, the Tmeos to Beis Hillel Beis Shammai Taros nimnu, because Beis Shammai was more lenient, and he was all is well by him. He's the beneficiary. That's great, but it doesn't make sense to say the Beis Hillel would marry in without knowing about the Tumah V'Tara. Ela Beis Hillel, fourth line. Ela Beis Hillel mi Beis Shammai lama lo nimnu. After all, Taros to Beis Shammai Beis Hillel tmeos nimnu. Ela lav must therefore be the model hushmamina. So the Gemara says it must be that yes, that Beis Shammai did in fact execute this psak, but it was just a question of whether or not it was informed. So says the Gemara, You told me that you brought the raya from the last case about Tumah V'Tara. Why is that case any bigger of a raya? Why was that the Makya B'Patish of our sugya? You brought in this case from Tumah V'Tara, and you're like, oh, now I know the Beis Shammai. Why is that any different than the case in the Mishnah where it says that they held that Tzaras Erva is mutter to the Yavam? What does one thing have to do with the other? Says the Gemara, Ma'u Detema Tzaras Kala Islay. You might have thought that maybe Tzaras Kala, there's people will talk about it, Kamash Malan, that that's not true. We equate them, and therefore we can learn from everything we've learned thus far that in fact Beis Shammai did execute this wild psak of Tzaras Erva, that's mutter, Kamash Malan, that it is the same as the Tumah V'Tara. All right, let's go back to one thing that we discussed earlier. It's 8 lines down, Yadal Amud Beis. We're going to go toward the end of the page. Gufa, we learned earlier today. Amar Rabbi Eliezer. We said earlier that even though we know that it's true that Beis Shammai Beis Hillel, they do argue about Tzaras Erva as to whether or not she can marry Yavam. Modim she'ein mamzer ela mimisha yisuro iser erva ve'anush kares. We know that a mamzer is the result of someone who has an iser erva with a punishment of kares. That is what generates a mamzeres. So we sometimes simplistically look at a mamzeres and say, as long as she was married to another man when she got pregnant, there's many more cases than that. It's any case where there's going to be an iser erva with kares, which is a lot of cases. That's a lot of cases. And we should be careful about that. It could be with a child. There's other cases as well. It's not all just a simple case. Now says the Gemara, looking back at this line of Rabbi Eliezer, it says that modim, they agreed, she'ein mamzer, that a mamzer is defined as X, as we just defined it. Man modim, who is the one being moda to who? Because we said that it's both about Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Who's being moda to who? Says the Gemara, Ilema Beis Shammai the Beis Hillel, if Beis Shammai is going to be moda to Beis Hillel, pshita, that should be very obvious because B'nei Chai ve'Lavin ksherim ninu. Because in his case, that's fine by him. Because even though they have a machlokas about tzoros, they agree that in mamzer cases it's prohibited. That's fine. Ela Beis Hillel Beis Shammai he gufa chai ve'krisosi. That doesn't make sense because if you say that Beis Hillel is being moda to Beis Shammai, we're already talking about a case of tzaras erva which he already holds as kares. So you can't say that he's moda. He's not moda. He's already in the camp of Isser Kares. It doesn't even make any sense. So it says the Gemara, you're right. Therefore, it has to be like we initially suggested. And if that's true, that case is obvious. So then says the Gemara, you're right. But it was to preclude our misunderstanding that we might have thought that we held like Rabbi Akiva. It was uleafu came into Rabbi Akiva. Damar yesh mamzer mechai ve'lavin. Very lenient or machmir shita, depending on how you look at it. But mamzeres could apply to a wider collection of cases, even when there's only a lab, or even when there's only a lab without kares. Kamash Malan, the reason why it says modim, even though it's obvious that it should be Beis Shammai to Beis Hillel, is because that we need to make sure that we announce that we don't hold like Rabbi Akiva and Kamash Malan de'ein mamzer mechai ve'lavin, that we really don't hold like chai ve'lavin. We don't hold that mamzerus can emanate from an isser that only has a lab, but rather, like we saw earlier, that the mamzerus has to come from an isser erva that is coupled with an onesh kares. Next, 1/3 of the way down, Tashma. Even though Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel argue in a lot of the following cases, they argue b'tzaros, as we saw, uve'achayos, in regards to sisters. We're not going to get into the details here, but get yashan. A get yashan is when someone gives a get and then afterwards has tashma shemita with their wife, which they should not do. Uve'safek eshes ish, which is a machlokes. We'll get to this soon. Uve'megarish es ish tavalana imo bepundak, a man who does in fact give a get to his wife, and then they end up sleeping in the same quarters. They also have a machlokes bekesed. And even though all of these differences were true, lo nimnu Beis Shammai milisa nashim mi Beis Hillel, velo Beis Hillel mi Beis Shammai, they still married one another. Lila mencha shechiba v'reus noagen zebazeh v'kayim mashenem ar ha'emes v'hashalom ehavu. This is from Hineni, or something from the pasuk, but it said in Hineni that ha'emes v'hashalom ehavu, that there was so much love between them, even though they fought tooth and nail. There was so much love between them. The Brisa concludes, Reb Shimon Omer, nimnu hein min havadai, velo nimnu min hasafek. So he says, not so pasha. Yes, there was peace between them, but no, they didn't agree to everything. When there was a vadai difference, so then they didn't agree. However, when there was a safek, then they allowed the marriages to take place. Okay. We're getting back into the sugya that we thought we concluded already. If you want to tell me that in fact Beis Shammai was lenient in the case of tzaros and in all of the other cases listed in this brisa, mishum hachinimnu, I could understand why you'd hold back in a case of vadai. Why would you hold back? If in fact they never executed the psak this way, then there's no reason for anyone to hold back. Says the Gemara B'Tizbra, this doesn't even make sense. Nihi nami, I could understand the asu that if in fact they did execute the psak this way, that a tsaras erba could marry the yavam. I could understand at least in one direction that Beis Hillel would be very concerned because we have a serious issue of kares here in regards to the tsaras erba. Big deal. So okay, she's a grusha. So just say she's a grusha. There's a lot of grushas in Klal Yisrael. That's not a new thing that happens all the time. So says the Gemara, Kid Amar of Nachman Bar Yitzchak lo nitzrucha ela letzara atzma, halchanami lo nitzrucha ela letzara atzma. We are only talking about the tzara herself. We're talking about the status of the tzara in marriage, and Rashi here deals with this 8 lines or so from the bottom. Dibra maschel letzara atzma. Hadekatani nimnaim mitzara atzma. We're only talking about this one woman. Rashi says it really Beis Shammai also agreed with the tzara herself that we wouldn't allow it. Beis Hillel. Milisa tzaras habas below chalitza, that we would not allow. There would have to be some type of chalitza first. Last little bit, we had said something that's very strange. We said in the brisa, "Umayshna min havadai de asirahu."
I'm not sure I understand.
I'm not sure I understand either.
General or it's like the homosexual.
Did I say something that sounded like?
I don't know. It took her 2 weeks. But...
I don't know. It's very embarrassing. Sorry. Anyways, where were we? Says the Gemara, Umay Shna, I'm like afraid to talk now. Umay Shna min havadai, de asiru. Umay Shna min havadai de isurahu safek nami isuru. The Mishnah says something so strange. Where it was a vadai, we held back because they were for sure. But if safek we're going to allow, we have the most basic principles in halacha of safek deraisa. Why are we allowing that? Says the Gemara, you're absolutely right. Lotema mina safik, ela ema mina stam, and as well coupled with that is the modi luhu parshe. So says the Gemara, that's the conclusion, is that when it comes to the halacha of safek, you're right, it should be usher. But min hastam, under regular circumstances of a regular girl, yes, you can marry that person, but please tell me or just show me her resume. What's her status? Is she a grusha? Is she a tzaras erva? All the other cases where there are differences. Umay kamashmalan, says the Gemara, what does this come to teach us? That at the end of the brisa as well, with Reb Shimon, the ava, the reus nagin zebazet. Says the Gemara, but Hainu Reisha. That was what happened in the beginning. We said that they were already good dear friends. Says the Gemara, you're right. But one subtle thing that we learn as an additional point here is Kamashma the Kula Reb Shimon. Because really only the second half of the brisa said Reb Shimon. And what this extra piece of Reb Shimon is coming to teach us is that the whole entire brisa was like the opinion of Reb Shimon. Mir Hashem will pick up tomorrow night with one blot. Wishing you all a beautiful night.